You've had a haircut, Gav.
I have had a haircut. Thank you for noticing.
I think you look really well.
It approaching Easter, we're obviously getting to the end of the National Football League, so now it's Championship Fade season. Yeah,
Championship
Except
Fade.
just not
Championship
a fade.
Fade?
Championship Fade is where GAA players like get a fade haircut, which is like a zero blade on the back, and then fade up to quite.
You need to be looking well for the launches for the start of the Championship.
Because you might only get 2 outings in the Championship, so it's very important you look your best.
I never knew this.
The Taunton Cup is going to be so lit with the hairdos this year.
Phenomenal.
Yeah. There you go.
I tried to get a booking. It was just, chock a block on Championship Fades.
I had all the slots already booked already.
I got my haircut yesterday. Neither of you noticed, but it's fine.
I observed it on Instagram.
I observed it on Instagram. Thanks.
I observed it. You're so welcome.
Thank you.
Hello, you're very welcome along to the very first episode of the group
chat.
The group chat is here.
We are a group and we are chatting. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, I'm Richard Chambers. I'm here with my fellow correspondent Zara King.
Hello.
And Gavan Reilly.
Hello, everybody. How are you?
Guys, we made it. We finally launched this thing.
We made it. With only a small bit of pressure, which we should open actually by saying thank you to everyone who subscribed before we even put out an episode at all, because we were, frankly, ludicrously placed in the Apple Podcast chart.
Number one.
For a podcast which
Ireland's number one. Gavin Bazunu, the podcast.
We had not produced a podcast. And we were the number one podcast.
We were very excited, and I would like to say that we are those kind of people who text our own group chat and we're like, guys, it's at number one. Which is
between texting my mom in the group chat. It was very exciting.
So
all people interested were very delighted.
So no pressure.
Thank you so much.
But yeah, we are really, really grateful for everyone who has subscribed, and we hope we make your early subscription worth your time.
Yes, we
the only way is down from here.
We should be like Ashley Barty. We've had a really good run there now. Let's just draw a line under it and do something else with our lives.
Walk off into the sun.
Unfortunately, there's so much to talk about that we can't do that.
How's everybody doing? How are you doing, Zara?
Yeah, I'm good. Busy. I've just been packing a bag actually before I came here because I'm going to Waterford tonight for the Royal Visit starting tomorrow, and it's in Tipperary on Friday. So packing, actually, I hate packing. Do you hate packing? I hate packing.
I've been unpacking.
Last minute
You've been unpacking.
I've been unpacking, and I'll be honest, I'm a little bit jet lagged. So sorry if I just go completely off kilter by the end of this podcast.
That haircut, though. The haircut, no.
Well, the haircut gives me an illusion of freshness that
it
my
makes
mind
you feel
does not
human
have.
again.
Yeah.
How are you, Richard? You been busy?
Yeah, good. Busy, but good. Every day is busy these days with this whole thing.
Yeah, there's a lot going on.
There is a lot going on. And I should probably explain, by the way, the reason I'm jet lagged is because I was in Washington last week with the Taoiseach, who was supposed to have a whole program of events, which he did not get to fulfill.
But fate intervened.
So we were all, and let's just sort of plunge straight into it. So everyone who was due to go to the White House on St. Patrick's Day was required to undertake a COVID-19 test before they did so, because, to be honest, let's not sort of beat around the bush. The president is 79 years old and would be medically vulnerable, so they're trying to keep COVID out of the White House as much as they can. So everyone, whether you're just a visitor or a media, or whether you're a visiting dignitary or an official or a bureaucrat or a diplomat, you're all required to take a COVID test administered by the State Department the night before. And so we all lined up at a designated hotel, and some State Department.
Is that antigen or PCR, by the way?
That is an antigen test.
Okay.
And then if you fail it, you are then referred on for subsequent PCR to check if it's actually valid or not.
Yeah.
Which happened in a couple of instances. So there were, I think, two people in the whole party, including press and government people, who failed their antigen test, and then they were all referred on for PCRs. Because somebody who was in close contact with the Taoiseach, a member of his own delegation, had tested positive on antigen, then he was referred on for a positive PCR test. And all of this was announced not by way of any kind of a little minor huddle where the press were all taken aside and just going, listen, just so you know. It was announced on stage by the Irish ambassador to a crowd of 700 people who, like everyone else, did not have a clue that it was coming. And it was fairly dramatic.
I now would invite the Taoiseach to the stage, but I had been informed that because the Taoiseach is on call as one of the leaders in the world, he will be his 2022 International Leadership Award will be given to Ambassador Daniel Mulhall, the ambassador from Ireland to the United States, Daniel Mulhall. Daniel.
Before we left to come here, all members of the delegation were tested for COVID-19, and the test on the Taoiseach was negative, but because a member of the wider delegation tested positive, and while that test was being checked and rechecked, out of an abundance of caution, the Taoiseach was tested just as he left to come here, and sadly that test has turned out to be positive.
Sorry, Richard's actually watched that behind his hands because he still can barely watch
I
that.
can't.
clip.
It's so difficult.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, like I've thoughts, right?
Okay.
First is how polite Nancy Pelosi is
Yeah.
in sort of covering for him, saying he's super important
Yes.
world leader and he's
Yeah.
on a call.
It is 8:30 in the evening.
Yeah.
It's midnight at home, and who knows what he has just been pulled aside for. And in fairness, Nancy Pelosi had been sitting beside the Taoiseach only a few minutes earlier.
And she clearly didn't know, obviously, at that time.
No,
She clearly
and it
didn't
was
know.
pretty obvious after Dan Mulhall made his speech that like it's never been explicitly stated, but Nancy Pelosi gave the clear air of somebody who was completely taken aback by this news. And just as President Biden would be mindful of exposure, Nancy Pelosi is 82 years old this weekend. I genuinely am in awe of the woman and her energy and how she manages to do it. She headed from California to Washington all the time. And she had been sitting maskless, sitting beside the Taoiseach, and there's press photographs to show this. Just before the Taoiseach was pulled aside by his officials to say, sorry, we just need to take him aside for a minute. So she was pretty obviously
Where were
skittish.
you for this?
I was at the back of the hall because the press are always put up in the gods. Way
Go in the
away
corner.
from anything.
Don't make trouble.
So we were at the back of the room, and in hindsight, there was the little hint that the two Irish embassy staff who were with us at the table that we were sitting at for that event, both just casually disappeared very suddenly a few minutes beforehand. But actually, we didn't notice because there was food being served, and we didn't spot that they were both taken away. And suddenly, then when that was announced, you have this penny dropping. You're like, so hang on, so the Taoiseach has COVID. That's not ideal, but you just want to double check, is what you've heard actually what you've heard? And you're looking around going, sorry, where's the lads? Oh, the lads are gone. Sorry, something really must be going on.
Because you tweeted it, and like I still texted you at like 1 o'clock in the morning to be like, sorry,
Yeah.
is this actually happening?
You were like, oh my God.
I know, and it wasn't that I didn't
that
believe you,
was-
but I just was so shocked
That
I couldn't.
was all of our feelings, that it was one of
Yeah.
those cases. I can only think of one other example, which was when Leo Varadkar came home from Washington 2 years ago, and then he announced the first full national
Yes.
lockdown
Yeah.
on a Friday night to take effect on the Saturday morning. And that was the only other time where I've been in a room where something was announced and nobody knew what was coming, or no one had any kind of prior inkling. And there was this cascade of gasps
Yeah.
where people were like, oh my God.
Yeah, because I remember I woke up at like 6 a.m. I saw it and I was like, oh my God.
So Richard is doing
How's this
power
possible?
hour, so everyone knows. So he's literally Richard's
Go to bed early, wake up super
and
early.
gets up
It's
super early.
great.
So
Yes.
when I was texting and it wasn't delivering to Richard, I was saying Richard is preparing for the power hour here. He's missed all of this.
And what a power hour it was.
Yeah.
But
I admire your dedication to have
You've
power
kept
hours
that
on
going
a
for a
national
really
holiday.
long time, actually. Yeah.
Well, look, you got to do it. You got to do it. You
You
can't
were working that day. You were reading the news that day, so you had places to be. Like,
Yeah.
You were still
Yeah.
doing your power hour.
You still have to. You have to commit to
loves
it.
that
Otherwise, you're not
power
going to get back on getting up at 5 a.m, like, you know. But the point I wanted to make, like, because to people outside, and there was so much discussion about the Taoiseach's positive COVID test, and obviously the Shamrock ceremony is thrown up into the air.
Yeah.
There was an air of chaos which I would probably have detected, and people who worked in sort of the media and journalism would detect it. But
Yeah.
people at home are wondering, well, how did it all go behind the scenes? Because people were asking, there was a lot of people online who were saying, oh my God, he must be so upset that this has happened. Obviously,
Yeah.
this is a huge deal. It's one of the good days you get to be a Taoiseach.
because
And if
there
you're a
aren't a
Taoiseach,
huge number of privileges that come with the job. So getting to sit down in the Oval Office once a year is pretty much the only.
definitely
amazing, especially because it's his only chance to do it, really.
Yes.
So, A, was he really upset by this? And B, what was it like behind the scenes as everything crumbles and all of the plans for these things are so like super planned. As they all tumble down, how sort of chaos.
Yes, well,
was sort of
it's
happening
fairly
behind the
chaotic.
scenes.
And the one thing just worth saying as a prelude to that, when you say how much work goes into it, it is worth stressing that, you know, people have this idea that the White House invitation just comes automatically every year, that it's this standing thing that you basically just show
It's a
up
TV
with
license, like.
and that they fully expect it to show up.
But if it didn't come, would it not just be considered a snub? in
It
fairness?
would, but that is the point that the
Well, you
Irish
just go
embassy.
anyway.
The Irish
I mean,
embassy
like, I feel like
turn up.
you would just
because,
go
like,
anyway.
obviously you can't go to the White House without being invited to go.
course,
So
of
like
course.
the embassy does have to go angling and fishing every January and February and just go, now you wouldn't want to be the president who'd break that routine now, would you? But like they do have to like push the boat. It isn't just a matter of road. They do have to press it. And every time there's a new president, you have to go and make the case again, because you don't want to be the new president that then changes the routine that you lose forever.
You also don't want to be the only Taoiseach who never got to do it as well.
Well, and he may yet get a chance, because there's talk that he might go back, having missed 2 opportunities already, that he might be invited back some other time before he hands over to Leo Varadkar in December. So A, was he disappointed? He took a Zoom press conference that evening, and Micheál Martin would never be one to wear his heart on his sleeve too much about personal ambitions, and he wouldn't get too invested
He's quite
in
private about
all of
that
that. He's
stuff.
quite private
Yeah.
about all of that. But he did admit in a fairly nonchalant way, he did admit to being disappointed. So I suspect if he admitted to it in that kind of a reserved sort of a way,
It spoke
that
volumes.
privately he was actually gutted. And then what happens, the chaos of all of that, everything just completely goes to pot, because then you have all of the embassy staff who are all, first of all, they're all running away trying to answer our questions, because it wasn't clear in the clip that you just heard and saw. It wasn't clear whether this was another PCR test or was it another antigen. What's going on? Does he have symptoms? What is happening? By the by, when all of this is happening, it is announced from the stage the Taoiseach has COVID. The Taoiseach is in the gents' toilets in the National Building Museum in Washington, D.C., being told he has COVID. And people after the speech want to go to the toilet.
gents' toilets being like isolated from everyone,
or I guess that's where he was brought aside, because it was the most discreet place to be told that he's got COVID,
That is probably
and that the date isn't going to happen.
Was it like a murmur in the room? Was it like one of those the Father Ted announcement thing? Like,
yeah, we're like Fargo Boyle,
yeah.
and everyone's just muttering, going, "Oh my god!"
I mean, it's the twist that you weren't expecting. So did that mean that you and all the journalists didn't get to go to the White House the next day either?
Correct. Yeah.
Were you quite disappointed?
I was less disappointed because full, media white privilege. I've been a couple of times before, this would have been my 5th time covering a Taoiseach trip. So I've been in before, and I know the general lay of the land. It's always a great place to be.
Okay.
But I was less gutted because I've been there and done that. There were a few members of the press corps who, in fairness, were really looking forward to the opportunity to get inside, and I was disappointed for them. What does the embassy do? The embassy basically then has to go away and completely negotiate with their White House counterparts, who by and large are going to bed. Like, the news broke at 8:30, and a lot of them aren't still at work at that time. And they have to work through the night with the protocol people and everyone else to figure out how much of the events can you actually salvage. Like, firstly, was it even possible, if the Taoiseach was now being isolated for COVID, was it even possible to get video conferencing kit to him? Because he was going to be staying in Blair House across the road from the White House, which is the official guest house. One of the other privileges you get when you're travelling is that they put you in the guest house across the street from the White House. And that's where Leo Varadkar announced the closure of the schools 2 years ago, was from there. So you have to figure out, first of all, can you even get the video kit in there? And then secondly, does the meeting still happen in the format that it did? If so, then will there still be Irish press that go into the room the same as the American press would? Are there stills photographers? Are there moving picture cameras? All of those things. Separately, does the lunch on Capitol Hill still happen? Because the Friends of Ireland lunch, it was always sort of unclear whether it was thrown in the honour of the Taoiseach. And if the Taoiseach isn't there, does the event still happen? As it turns out, it did happen, but that was up in the air for a while, and then the media go to that as well. And then the Shamrock reception, because if you remember last year when it all happened over video call, there was obviously the bowl of Shamrock was pre-presented and Joe Biden was sitting beside it, and there it was. In the usual course of events, there are 2 events in the White House. There's the meeting earlier in the day, and then there's a reception later in the day at which you've come back, and at that point you present the Shamrock. So then there's the question, does that reception go ahead, that party for 300 odd people?
God, it was a total mess, wasn't it?
Does that happen? Because the Shamrock may already have been presented at that point. And you had staff working through the night, and we were all then in regular contact with the Taoiseach's travelling press team trying to figure out when do all those things happen. And it was only up until an hour before some of the events that we had any rough idea as to what the sort of outlook of the day was going to be. Like, it was months of diplomacy just completely upended by a chance result in a PCR test.
And a sharp reminder that COVID has not gone away.
It has not gone away, as we've been seeing.
Yeah, so the Taoiseach is on his way then to Brussels then for the EU Council meeting.
The CDC rules in the US require somebody who has tested. Rules. The advice is that you're supposed to isolate for 5 days.
Yes.
Which the Taoiseach did. So he stayed for 2 nights in Blair House, and then he served the remainder of his isolation in the home of the Irish ambassador, which I guess is convenient because it means you don't have to pay for a hotel room. And also Dan Mulhall's house.
Nice house, is it?
Dan Mulhall's house has 9 bedrooms and 8 bathrooms. It is in the middle of Embassy
But was he
Road.
allowed to leave the bedroom though? He's probably isolating.
It's a good question, because we don't know whether he was displaying symptoms or whether he had to stay in a bedroom for the entire time. That much we've never been able to figure out.
Yeah.
But either way, obviously he's tested negative twice, and he's going to be on his way to Brussels for the summit, which is taking place today. By the time you hear this, Joe Biden will also be there, so maybe he'll get some FaceTime with him after all. But he is actually travelling in breach of the CDC advice.
This is why I ask.
The advice is that you are supposed to remain isolated for at least 5 days until you've started testing negative and your symptoms are gone. But you're still not supposed to take public transport of any sort or be in any kind of a congregated transit setting for another 5 days after that. So in theory, at least, the Taoiseach was honouring that American advice. He wouldn't be travelling home until this coming weekend. Now, the government's stance is that this is only advice. It's guidelines. It's not regulation. It's not demanded by law, which is true, but that's also true for all of the Irish advice that we've had for the last 2 years, that it has never been the law that if you have COVID you have to stay at home or stay in your bedroom. That's never been a binding thing. It has always just been advice. So the advice is being casually overlooked they would probably say it's for the public good or for the national interest, because nobody else is allowed to fill in for Micheál Martin at these summons in Brussels. You can't send a junior minister, you can't send a Taoiseach. If he is not there, there is no Irish person present.
Right.
So they would probably argue that, look, if he's negative and they know that he's safe, it is in his interest and the national interest that he go. But it is in breach of the official American advice.
What a week. What a week.
What a week.
But COVID here, as you mentioned, is rearing its head again. The government is saying that there's no plans to even discuss the idea of going back to restrictions. But what we've seen really over the last number of weeks is a surge in cases. You're seeing, tens of thousands of people on any given day sometimes testing positive.
Yeah.
23,000 earlier.
Yeah, 23,000 earlier in the week.
And that's almost certainly underreported as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, people are uploading their own antigen test results and everything, but there was 23,000, was it on Tuesday? It was 23,000 in one day, and it's enormous. I mean, we knew we had 20,000 back in January. They were all PCR tests. That was at a time we didn't really know the quantity of people who were getting back their positive antigens at home because they weren't uploading them. But it's BA2. It's this strain of Omicron that seems to be the big factor.
Explain to people then the new strain or what's kind of different about it, and is it possible that you can actually get sick from the two strains?
Yeah,
one
it
after
is.
the other?
So, like, we're seeing examples of that where people who might have had COVID back in January or whatever are now getting sick again. It's just a far more transmissible strain of this particular variant. It's not that it's more virulent in a sense. It's not that it's more, you're not going to get sicker from it per se. As in, I don't think that the concerns around all of this from any of the experts is disease severity, but it is about volume, because you have to remember that people who get COVID and they go into hospital, even if it's for a secondary reason, you're still going to be taking up a lot of space in a sense that you're being treated in isolation. So it's a lot of resources.
You can pass it on to the staff as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it's huge. It's huge. And a lot of people who've been sick over the last couple of weeks, I just actually put a thing on Instagram today just to ask people kind of how they were coping with it. I want to take a look at some of the responses we got, because I suppose sometimes we're hearing that people are having a mild dose of it, but not everyone is having that experience, and some people are actually finding that they've been quite sick with it. So some of the replies included someone saying, look, very mild, had a head cold, boosted and it worked. Another person said tired, dry cough, I had it last week.
A lot of people are saying tiredness.
Tiredness is the one to watch.
Yeah, you had it a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, I had it 3 weeks ago, and it was kind of what everybody's sort of saying there. That sort of, there was a cough initially, then it was really tiredness, and that sort of stuck around even after I started to test negative again. Taste and smell was another one which I had, which apparently had. It's interesting because you sort of hear it's very anecdotal, but you hear different strains or different variations of it will have different,
slightly different
prominence. Yeah. But that was a problem for me then for a while after. But it sort of tallies with what you're sort of hearing there.
Yeah, Emma says horrendous, couldn't get out of bed for days and had really bad pains in the chest. She got it in January, she said. Day 7 today, sore throat at the start, then a heavy cold and a little cough, but no temperatures, no pains. It just seems to be different in everyone. Someone saying tough, took me out very much like a bad flu, took 2 to 3 weeks to recover fully for me. Bad headache, sore tongue and sore legs.
Sore tongue?
I know, yeah, that's one I haven't heard before actually. But I mean, again, like a really kind of mixed response. So that's the point, I suppose, is that none of us really know how it's going to behave until you actually get it. But it's the masks as well. It's an interesting point. The INMO calling this week for a temporary return of the mask mandate, wanting to kind of, just so we get over this current wave, they're basically saying, let's go back to a mask mandate. So I put again a poll up on Instagram today about that in terms of whether people were wearing their masks or not. 60% saying that they're still wearing their masks all the time, 23% saying sometimes, and 17% saying not at all. I was surprised by that response, actually.
It's surprising. It kind of seems that your followers are maybe slightly more adherent to mask wearing than the general public is, because you go a lot of places
people who are
now.
interested in the news.
When I was getting my championship fade haircut, I was the only person in the hairdressers wearing a mask.
No, and I feel like I'm often the only person wearing a mask in a lot of places I go as well, so I don't really know. But
it's interesting though, because the WHO, David Nabarro, who's been a prominent sort of spokesperson for the World Health Organization, who comes and speaks to the Irish media, he sort of said that there was it makes sense to wear a mask in crowded settings, practice physical distancing, all of that sort of stuff. But also the WHO saying that Ireland lifted restrictions brutally, that there wasn't really. And I suppose now when you're having this conversation that we're having around, well, what do we do now that there's a concern at a government level, or there's a concern at a public level as well about the way things are going, when you're having this level of infections, you're seeing people translating into hospital, or you're seeing numbers of people with COVID in hospital. When you're getting to that and you don't seem to have a backup plan, or because you're now getting people questioning, it's like, well, where is it? Well, Neffet's gone. Do we have a new Neffet?
Which is a genuine question, which was asked of Leo Varadkar on Wednesday, and he was asked about Neffet 2, Electric Boogaloo. This the sequel that nobody wants. But he said that there will imminently be some new sort of, not necessarily public advice group, but just some sort of surveillance group set up to keep a closer eye on these things, largely based around the CMO. So as it stands right now, with Neffet gone and Neffet Nua not yet in situ. It basically falls to Tony Holohan acting solo to recommend any restrictions if there are any. He's got a very silent presence for the last month or so, but there is no sign, even if he was minded to do something, there's very little sign of the government wanting to accept it. And it is worth bearing in mind as well that the laws which allow the government to issue emergency powers, like the law requiring you to wear masks, or the law that never happened to require you to stay at home if you're positive, that law expires next week. And unless the Dáil and the Seanad vote to renew it, then that's it, that's gone. The government actually has no more emergency powers. If they wanted to enforce a mask mandate or anything else, they'd have to go back to the Dáil and Seanad and pass a brand new law to do it. And this far into the pandemic, with cases broadly mild, with large numbers in hospital, but with only about half of them actually being treated for COVID per se, I don't see much of an appetite for them to go back to that, because it would basically be square one as far as I'm concerned.
Just to take some of the responses about mask wearing just that we got from listeners. Claire says, yes, I think we're all still to be wearing masks and be responsible and take care of ourselves individually. Sally says, I had stopped wearing one, but wearing it since last week. Emma says, I stopped immediately, got COVID, so I will be wearing them again. Geraldine says, I'd prefer to keep wearing them, but with my glasses, I do like the option to take them off if needed, which I do understand that as well. Someone saying, I feel masks help to protect others and it's respectful in busy settings. Someone else says starting to wear it more now. And then Michael says wearing a mask and going to the shop, etc. I'm diligent, still using hand sanitizer lots. So I think it's a really personal choice for people. It's funny, I still personally feel like the hand sanitizing is something I'm obsessed with. I think I was kind of like that before COVID
if
anyway.
That's the thing that you do for 2 years. It's a very difficult habit to kick. I mean, even to the point where I'm not like ideologically wedded to masks, but because I stayed in the habit of wearing them, because I also needed to pass a COVID test to get to go to Washington in the first place, and I was petrified of failing the test, so I kept wearing it to try and make sure that I was okay for that. You come home then afterwards and it's the habit that you're in, that it would nearly feel like it would be a gesture to pointedly get out of your car and not bring a mask with you. It's still the habit.
Well, I remember when I was in Sweden actually last October, I was saying that to you when I came back. Do you remember that like nobody had masks on? And it was so weird. I remember my cousin who lives in Stockholm saying to me, like almost like an intervention, are you okay? Like, because I had the mask on all the time, and he's kind of going like, are you all right? And I was like, yeah, we wear masks all the time at home. And he thought it was insane that we were wearing masks all the time.
So interesting that different regions of the world have different sort of perspectives on it. Like that's the Scandinavian model. And like,
he was trying to have an intervention with me.
He's like,
are you okay?
What's wrong with you? Are you okay?
Yeah.
But it's interesting because, like, if you take Scandinavia, for example, like the best, obviously people are worried about this particular wave, and it is a wave, really, of BA2 COVID. But people are pointing to Denmark. And Denmark is just really interesting because there's been so many times during the pandemic where you ask health experts, well, what's going to happen next? And they're like, well, Denmark knows what's going to happen next. It's just so fascinating that they just have the most tooled up, like, genetic sequencing and all that sort of stuff.
Literally ahead of the curve in this instance.
So basically they've seen the same sort of thing happen here in terms of the big surge in new infections and then hospitalizations, and then it turned around very quickly, which is actually kind of, in fairness, what happened with the Omicron wave around
that it sort of burns itself out because there's only so many people that it can actually infect effectively.
So I suppose that's the thing to take a look at. Obviously there will be people though, because when you have such a huge amount of people becoming sick with COVID-19, there will be people who become very sick with COVID-19. I think that when you just look at things in terms of a time, if you're just saying, well, this wave wasn't bad because it lasted for a very short period of time, I think you're kind of missing the point. And I think that's something which always needs to be borne in mind when you're talking about COVID-19 or any illness or any story you're talking about in the news. There's always people at the end of it. And I just think that that's something that we probably need to reflect on time and time again. In that obviously we're all affected by COVID and restrictions and all that sort of stuff, but people are always at the end of it. So, like, I mean, obviously everybody wants these things to go away quickly, but there will be people who will. And
particularly, I think in the week where we're remembering people who died from COVID as well, I think it's important to really acknowledge that, because I do feel sometimes, and you and I, all of us have kind of spoken to a lot of families who lost loved ones to COVID, and I think sometimes it can just get a little bit lost when people are so eager to get back to normal life that actually there are a lot of families who probably will never feel like life is normal again because the people they lost are gone forever.
I definitely think the public, especially about 2 months ago when we were in the teeth of Omicron and then we were beginning to come out of it again, it was very obvious that people had split into two camps. There were those who saw COVID as being a health concern, that, you know, if you get infected, you could have long COVID symptoms afterwards. Your life could be irreparably damaged one way or another. And then there were others who only saw COVID as a threat to their civil liberties, because if cases were too high that you'd have to wear a mask, or you might not be able to go to certain settings, or you might not be able to have certain gatherings. And that was the way through which they saw it. And both are valid. But I think you can't be blind, and reporting shouldn't be blind to the fact that even if there are 23,000 people, and even if a smaller fraction now get sick of those.
Yeah.
That's still a large number of people in hospital. And even if they are not being treated for COVID, there are, as you said earlier, knock-on consequences for everyone else. There were 225 COVID admissions on the Wednesday that we were recording this, which is the highest one-day total at any time in the pandemic. Most of them, thankfully, are being treated for something other than COVID, but it's a big administrative burden on top of anything else.
It is for the frontliners. I mean, it's no joke. I wouldn't want to be in their shoes right now.
Well, we'll keep an eye on it as it progresses. Hopefully, it is something which, fingers crossed, it doesn't turn into something worse than it currently is. Today, I mean, the podcast is out. This is Thursday when the podcast is released, the 24th of March. It is now a month to the day since the war in Ukraine started, since Russia invaded Ukraine. I think you're starting to see some of the impact and sort of the trajectory of what the impact will be like here. And I'm sure we're going to talk about Ukraine a lot over the next coming weeks and perhaps months, if not even longer, in some context or other. But the impact and what it's going to mean here. The ESRI today was out talking about this. You had people from the fuel and motoring industry talking about fuel prices. And again, it's something that we even talked about sort of casually beforehand. We were sort of saying, well, how bad can this get? And I remember you, Zara, were asking, well, is it going to be a stage where we're going to have energy rationing? And then that's something which like forecasters are actually
it's not being ruled out at all.
Yeah.
And the Americans, when I was over there as well, even the concern was slightly less about the humanitarian aspect because they're not on Ukraine's doorstep and they're not quite as worried about the administrative challenges of taking on so many people. They were all petrified about the price of gasoline going up because for them, $5 a gallon is the equivalent to our €2 per litre, where they were all completely losing their heads over how expensive it was going to be to drive around. So that there are universal effects to all of this and cost of living increases all over the world.
Definitely. And in terms of that fallout and that response from Ireland, just to say as well, the Red Cross are due to house the first people into the pledged housing now next week. So at the moment, it's 20,000 houses have been pledged. 4,000 of those are vacant properties. So they're working through those first. They've got a call centre with around 20 Defence Forces members who are calling the owners of those properties and checking with them to see, first of all, if they're still on for doing this, which will be for 6 to 12 months. And then also, then they send valuers out to have a look at the property to make sure then that it's suitable, that it has furniture, etc., etc. So I think they're hoping that at least 50% of those, so 2,000 of those, will be suitable. And at the moment, the list in terms of people who've come from Ukraine who want to be housed is around 4,500. So
yeah,
it's interesting just the process on the Red Cross thing, because a lot of people were, and I'm sure it's the same for you guys as well. People are saying, "Well, I signed up for this. When do I get to?"
Yeah,
hear
they're
about
keen
that?
to know about it. Yeah.
And like some people have sort of gone elsewhere. There's other sort of NGOs who are doing their own thing as well.
And it's just individuals,
Yeah,
Angie
and this is
Goff
the biggest
is someone I
thing.
interviewed. Yeah,
The biggest thing which has happened so far is really people from Ukraine who have already been living here, or people from Poland who are already living here, who know people from
Who
Ukraine.
have connections.
Yeah.
It's the Central and Eastern European people who are already based here are sort of just opening their homes, and just that's the sort of way that it's working. So that's something which it's something I was chatting to a Polish group together, Chasm in Cork, who are basically doing it's an unbelievable thing to see. They're doing basically a whole integrated thing where they'll have like the Polish kids who are already living here will welcome your Ukrainian friends, people who are arriving here, and it's just incredible. There's incredible stuff which is happening at a sort of a lower level, sort of on the ground level, if you want to put it that way, to sort of try and get around this. And I think
definitely, and I think it's really impressive to see that response actually. And I think
it's amazing. Yeah,
people like Angie Goff, who's a woman I interviewed last week, and her husband, they live over in Ranelagh. She just literally got totally involved in it, and like all her neighbours are involved, and they've housed up to 100 people now as they're coming through, and they're sort of doing a temporary housing situation while people wait for the Red Cross to come through, and they're in constant contact with the Red Cross. So the people that they're housing for the moment are all on the Red Cross list, but they just know that they could be waiting a little while. And just to say to anyone who has pledged maybe like a spare room in a house share setting, the reason you're not hearing from the Red Cross is because they are still working through those vacant properties.
It's going to take a lot of time.
It's going to take a little while. And also to remember as well, there's going to be Garda vetting involved in that if you're going to have people coming in and sharing your home.
Yeah.
But
so
also,
if you're bringing in children, which is going to be a lot of cases.
It is, but they've moved to kind of escalate that as well. And it's going to be done within a 7-day period as well when that eventually comes around. But I think that's going to be a couple of weeks away, to be honest.
When you telling us as well a couple of weeks ago when you'd come back from reporting on the Polish border that the first wave of refugees tended to be those who maybe were slightly better equipped or better resourced or even better educated, who had leads across the rest of Europe, wanted to go and talk to them. They maybe had a better command of another language, and so they would be able to navigate the whole mess with a little bit more ease. But then as time goes on, it'll be people who were reluctant to leave, who don't have a support network, who don't necessarily have another language.
Yeah, it was more about the connections, really. Yeah, totally. It was more so about connections in general, just that anyone who kind of had connections or had someone to go and stay with, basically they left and they went to stay with them. And actually, sorry, speaking of that, actually one of the little girls that we met while we were on the Ukrainian border, I didn't even tell both of you this, Mila, she was featured in some of our reports. She messaged me on Instagram, actually. She found me on Instagram and messaged me the other day to say that she's staying now with friends of her family in the Czech Republic, and she's hoping that eventually she will get home. But
that's lovely.
But she was like, I really miss home. And I was like, oh, Mila, you know, we're thinking of you. But so she's gorgeous girl. But look, nice that she has someone to stay with, but just ultimately, like most Ukrainians, really keen to just get home.
And it's an extraordinary number, and this will be the thing that we'll end up coming back to in the coming weeks, the sheer volume of people that are going to need accommodation elsewhere in Europe. And I've seen some people somewhat cynically suggesting that Ireland is trying to act the European big lad, or that it's looking for international plaudits by committing to potentially taking as many as 200,000. You know, we can never really know what's in the government's mind when it commits to that, but every other EU country is going to have to take a phenomenal number of people because of just the sheer volumes that are displaced in the country and who have to be expected to leave. Like there's, at the time we're recording this, is in the region of 3.6 or 3.7 million people have managed to leave the country altogether, but there are 6 million more displaced internally. And that's before the battle really truly sets in some places like Odessa, where people may have been holding steady and who will now want to leave. There's an enormous number of people, and women and children who could be followed by their husbands and fathers, who may need to come afterwards if the battle doesn't go their way. So it's an enormous thing. And like, even at the time we're recording this, there's already over 10,000 people who've come to the country who need some sort of support network. That's the equivalent of the number of people who were homeless in this country at the peak of the crisis a couple of years ago, just before COVID set in. And they've all come in the space of a month, literally a month. And we may have 10 or 15 or 20 times more than that to come in the next few months. It's going to be an enormous administrative challenge.
Yeah, and do get in touch with us if you have your own stories of this, because there's so much happening across the country in communities. Like, you're seeing schools open. Like, that's something which I was taken aback by myself when I was out reporting with one family who had arrived at an Educate Together school in West Dublin, and they were just literally the day after they arrived, they're straight into the classroom.
Yeah.
I just think that's absolutely
great.
just beautiful.
It's great for people to show such initiative, because classrooms in Ireland are not generally spacious places with lots of spare seating. So it's amazing that they can just flip a switch and accommodate people like that.
Although one 12-year-old girl who came from Ukraine, Maria, who I interviewed, was 2 days into school, and they were already asking her to take Irish lessons, which I think, in fairness to her, was probably a bit of a bridge too far.
Her command of she'll get it all.
Nice to be welcomed, but God love her. I mean, it must have been a bit of a culture
on the
shock.
subject of welcomes then, royal visit underway in Ireland at this point. Britain's Prince Charles and Camilla, to go with the informal title, now on their 6th visit to Ireland since they began.
They're always here. They're never home.
6th visit. But
They love the place.
You're covering this for us, Zara.
Yeah.
Tell us, first of all, what's the game plan on this for the next couple of days?
Well, so they're going to Waterford today, and then tomorrow it's going to be Tipperary. And I suppose the whole premise of it is to meet some community groups. They're going to be meeting some frontline workers. They're going to be, Prince Charles is quite into sustainability and the environment and stuff. So he's meeting a couple of farmers.
Famously,
he is famously quite interested in that, actually. So he's going to be meeting some farmers who are quite involved in Ireland reaching our climate goals. And, ultimately, I get the impression that they quite just like it here, and they keep coming back here sort of on a working holiday.
They want it.
Year after year.
If you come back 6 times, you want to like it.
The British ambassador to Ireland told me yesterday that once they do Waterford and Tipperary, they're sort of halfway through the counties, so they're hoping to do all of them eventually.
Yeah,
soon to a town near you.
Are they going to be made to try their hands at hurling again? Because
no, it's not on the agenda. No, the hurling's not on the agenda.
They've already got it.
It's not there. Oh yeah, well, so I have the agenda.
They will be given.
I'm actually not allowed to tell people where they're going till they go there, actually, for security reasons. But no, there's no hurling on it. There's another sporting thing, but not hurling.
Okay.
Well, there you go. A little tidbit there.
Yeah.
Generally, we've had a few of these as we've seen so far. And I mean, it is worth mentioning at this point that there is a situation where there is another royal visit happening elsewhere in the world, in the Caribbean, particularly in Jamaica, where the future King of England, Prince William, and Kate Middleton are there. And there's a huge groundswell of protests, really, about the history of the royal family, what it means in terms of colonialism. People now, and political parties there on a big level, also pushing for reparations, effectively, from Britain for the history of slavery, which the royal family was obviously involved in going back down 2 years. So it's an interesting one. We don't really have a huge amount of time to talk about it. I'm sure it'll be interesting to see how this one plays out
kind of
after the visit.
wonder how have a lot of those, that sort of groundswell, if there was to be one in Ireland, did it kind of exhaust itself with the visit of the Queen?
Because that was the big one in terms of protest,
that was
wasn't it?
2011. Like it got 11 years ago. It's mad how time has flown by. But at that point, there was a lot of security disruption because of threats since. And since then, this will be the 6th visit of Charles and Camilla. Harry and Meghan were here. William and Kate were here. Like, they were here 2 years ago.
Were you on
they passed by my front row 2 years ago.
I was on all of those actually, and I did the royal wedding that time as well. I've done a lot of the royal stuff. Yeah, what I would say about the Harry and Meghan thing at the time was there was massive interest because they had just gotten married at that time. So it was really big at the time. And even I think with Kate and William, because it was their first visit to Ireland at the time, that was quite big. I just don't know if, I think, people will be fine or whatever, but I just don't know if there'll be a massive, it'd be interesting to see what the crowds are like over the next couple of days, to be honest. Because when Kate and William went to Galway, there was quite a big crowd there. Likewise, Harry and Meghan, I mean, the streets, it was quite busy, the Harry and Meghan stuff at the time.
And that was central Dublin too, wasn't it?
It was. Yeah. Like, I do wonder, as you said, because Charles and Camilla come quite regularly, that is a kind of, they're here all the time. So
there's almost like there's a lot of other stuff happening in the world.
There
at
is
the moment
really,
as well.
yeah. I just don't. I think whether or not people will turn out will be interesting. I think to see over the next couple of days. Yeah.
I did their first one, Charles and Camilla, when they first came over.
Where was that?
It was in the west. It was Galway,
2015.
Sligo. So obviously he went to
Mullaghmore.
Yeah.
Which was obviously very profound, based on that's obviously where Lord Mountbatten was killed. So he went to sort of basically a pilgrimage there. And I just find the way that dignitary, and you're sort of talking about it with Washington as well, the way that sort of these official visits and dignitary visits are organised is always very funny. I just find some of it, like, for people who don't know, like, there's a lot of times you won't be able to do everything on the tour. Like, so Zara, I'm sure you're aware of this.
You have to pick
different streams.
Yeah.
You'll be like, you have option A, which
I just did it yesterday. Yeah, we had to pick option A, B, or C.
So basically, you'll go to parts of it. You'll go to maybe the first gig of the day or their first visit. Say they're calling into a school. You'll go to that, and you'll go to one in the afternoon after they've done something else.
And you're bussed around on these.
But the idea being that obviously the media has to be there before the royals arrive, so it's not possible to cover everything that they do. So you have to pick and choose which events of the tour that you're going to be able to.
So it's very carefully stage managed. I remember my big responsibility was, so it got cut off into pools. So pooling again is like, so say there's obviously a big gang of hyenas who are the press corps, and that's cameras and it's reporters and all that sort of stuff. And
hyenas, what a lovely metaphor.
Well, like, that's what it's like. We're just ravenous for news.
It's like you get given a packed lunch, by the way, from the press centre.
You get a packed lunch for this one.
You get a packed lunch for all these things.
It'd be like a Capri Sun and a Baby Bell.
Honestly, I did get a Capri Sun on one of them one time. That's a true story.
But it's amazing. That would keep me going.
You do get a packed lunch on royal visits when you're in the media. They give you, because you're not going to get feds. They give you a little lunch.
You need to, yeah. It's true.
When you're getting on the bus, they give you a bag with a sandwich in it and a Capri Sun, and you do.
Real glorious. But I remember. So Charles Camilla were doing a dinner at a castle somewhere in Galway with President Higgins and Sabina.
Sorry, pooling, by the way, is where there are too many members of the media to attend physically, so you have to basically find representatives of the media who then will go back and report.
You'll pick one who'll do like the print bit or the written bit, and one who'll do like photos or
one TV camera. And you share the material with everyone else.
Yeah,
so I was doing the written bit for this one, which was, again,
when you're working in radio,
I had to do it.
So
basically, it was a big banquet they were doing. So like they handed out a little menu card and all that sort of stuff, and I was like, oh, this is good stuff.
Doing a pool is a lot of pressure.
A lot of pressure. This is what I'm getting to. So like, I basically ended up in this tiny little sitting room with Charles, Camilla, the president, Sabina Higgins, and I'm just there looking at them, and like we're being hurried out by like the Department of Foreign Affairs who are running the thing, and the British Embassy are like, right, that's enough, and I'm just there standing like basically the distance between you and me, Gavin, about 6 feet away from Prince Charles, and I was just like, what do I do? I need to do journalism. So I took out my phone and I just went click. And I just got like, so the person
was there no snapper there?
There was a snapper, but it was like kind of just do whatever you can in the 2 minutes you're here. So I just took really awkward photos.
How do you, as efficiently as possible, take notes of the event? Well, you take a photograph of the menu.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Photograph of the menu and just awkward photos of Charles while he looks at you and sort of grumbles. Sort of like, are you done here yet?
But the pool copy is always like you're just trying to overhear what everyone's talking about at that thing. You know what I mean? Like,
you're overwriting stuff. Like
you are.
You are milking it.
You're totally overplaying it.
Everybody's going to depend on this really important copy, so I'm just going to put everything in there. Did you have any highlights from visits previous?
From royal visits previous, I suppose.
Or any? It doesn't necessarily have to be a royal visit. It could be any sort of
state visit. Well, we've covered loads of them. I suppose Donald Trump was obviously here that time that he was down in Doonbeg.
I remember the White House pool reporting that all of the hills around Doonbeg were emerald green, which I found a bit twee.
That's again the pool thing.
It was accurate, but it was twee. But it is the pool thing where you're trying to insert as much actual, in this case, literal colour as you possibly can.
I think that like the most, like I say, the most kind of the Harry and Meghan visit, in fairness, at the time, because then they only ended up really working for a year in Royal Service at the time. So was it a year they did? 12 months in the end, was it?
Thereabouts, I think.
Limited run, yeah.
I mean, it was a limited run, so I suppose like because it was limited edition, I suppose looking back on it now, like I mean, I covered their wedding a few weeks before that, so it was kind of interesting. They had like a garden party at the British Ambassador's residence, which was kind of attended by, you know, like the Brian O'Driscoll and Amy Abrams of the world, and it was kind of
That's right.
Vicky Phelan was there that day as well. Actually, Vicky was at that. So I mean, maybe that was kind of, you know, a bit fancy or whatever. But I mean, look, ultimately, I suppose, you know, these events and these visits are always about sort of, you know, solidifying the relationships between Ireland and Britain, and that's certainly what we'll be hearing a lot of over the next couple of days.
And they are certainly more chaotic than they would seem if you just looked at all of the very polished photographs and footage. Very chaotic, very sweaty coverage in the middle.
And a lot of Capri Suns.
The time that I was on something comparable to that was actually the last time that Joe Biden was in Ireland. He visited Mayo as vice president in 2016, so his tenure was sort of about to run out, but he always wanted to make the family trip to Mayo, so he did a tour of various Mayo towns and then went walkabout in Ballina. And the only reason I remember it very distinctly is because the journalists who were covering it were in a kind of a Secret Service bubble, basically, where you had gone through airport scanning somewhere else previously.
No, I have to bring my passport tomorrow.
Yeah, well,
you were
basically you were escorted everywhere by their local security people. And I remember us being in a Secret Service bubble walking down the main street in Ballina while Joe Biden left the bubble and went and shook hands and literally kissed every Tom, Dick and Geraldine on the side of the road.
Very hard to be a Secret Service man.
And like we were like, sorry, can we have any proximity or any access so we can even overhear what is being said? And the Secret Service were like, no, we need to keep you away from the principals here. Or we need to keep you away from Celtic, because that's his Secret Service code name, which is a sign of why St. Patrick's Day is such a big deal for him. But everyone else was there literally rubbing shoulders with the man, and we were being held 10 yards away by Secret Service, wondering if we would have gotten better access by just queuing up on the side of the street.
I can't let this go by now that mentioned the time I met the Pope on the plane. I mean, I never tell that story.
You did. Listeners should know, because Zara very rarely tells this.
I met the Pope on it. So again, this is one of these, what would you call it? You wouldn't call it a state visit when the Pope came, would you?
It would be, is that
I suppose. You would. Yeah.
Papal visit.
I mean, the papal visit. Just really, there's nothing to say other than, you know, I love casually saying to people sometimes, "Oh, I met the Pope on a plane once," and they're like, "Really?" I'm like, "No, I actually did."
I just Stansted. I was going on a football weekend.
He was on his way to Stamford Bridge for the weekend. Did you offer him a hurl?
No, he doesn't speak English, by the way. So I spoke to him. He pretended he understood. I gave it a bit of a nod.
Look, he's from Buenos Aires. Buenos Aires used to have a big hurling culture. There's still a district in Buenos Aires called Hurlingham, from when hurling was really big. It would have been really big, and then they had to. Sorry, this is kind of total tangent.
Here's me trying to wrap the show.
Richard's like, please.
On this note, Gav doing Gav things. There's a district in Buenos Aires called Hurlingham, which is named after the sport, and which was the site of the local hurling club.
Yeah.
And hurling was apparently like on the cusp of becoming a really, really prominent sport in Argentina until World War II, and then suddenly you couldn't export the ash wood to be able to go over there to make
this
hurls.
Feels peak Gav to me.
And it was repurposed as a cricket club, and now the hurling club of Buenos Aires to this day is still a cricket club, but its origins are from our own games way back when.
I love that.
Amazing tidbit. I'm going to save my Pope stories until a future podcast.
Okay.
But guys,
we'll revisit.
Always leave them wanting more.
There'll be more. There's some good ones in there. But do let us know as well if you've had any interesting
Have you met the Pope on a plane?
Have you met the Pope?
Could be other world leaders, anything like that. We do want to hear that. So you can get us on any of your chosen platforms, or if you have any questions for us, as we do this week to week.
And thank you to those who sent in their responses actually today on Instagram.
Yeah,
we
appreciate it. Thanks to the early adopters.
Yeah, thank you.
We have a stack of questions as well for us as well, which we'll get through over the time. But so thanks everybody for sending in.
So we'll be back next Thursday with episode 2 of the group chat.
Amazing.
See you then.
We'll see you all then.
Thanks everyone.